The unexpected allies, Thor and Hulk, arrive. The battle of the five armies had reached its peak. Orcs, goblins, elves, dwarves, and men fought desperately under the looming shadow of Sauron's army, with the fate of Middle-earth hanging in the balance. The once proud warriors of the free peoples of Middle-earth were losing ground. Orcs flooded the battlefield, their numbers seemingly endless. The free peoples had fought valiantly, but they were on the verge of being overwhelmed. Hope was all but lost, and the battle seemed destined to end in a tragic, crushing defeat. But in the chaos, something changed. A blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed by the deafening sound of thunder that shook the very earth beneath their feet. The sound was unlike anything the soldiers of Middle-earth had ever heard before. The air became electrified, and the wind picked up with a force that pushed against the tide of battle. A figure emerged from the storm, Thor, the god of thunder, his hammer, Mjolnir, crackling with raw power. As Thor landed on the battlefield, the storm subsided for just a moment, revealing the hero's powerful figure. His golden hair shone bright against the darkened sky, and the light from his enchanted hammer illuminated the field. Thor's eyes, filled with determination and fury, scanned the chaotic scene before him. Without a word, he raised Mjolnir high, and a bolt of lightning struck from the heavens, obliterating a horde of orcs and sending them flying into the air. The free peoples, unsure of whether this was some new foe or ally, stopped in their tracks, watching in awe as Thor fought with the power of a god. His strikes were swift and devastating, tearing through the orc ranks as if they were nothing more than paper. Thor moved with unmatched grace and strength, his divine power giving him the edge against even the largest orc warriors. Each swing of his hammer sent shock waves that flattened entire groups of enemies, and his call to the storm shook the very foundations of the battle. But Thor wasn't alone. With a massive crash, the ground trembled again as the Hulk, Rage incarnate, burst into the battlefield. His arrival was nothing short of catastrophic. The ground beneath his feet cracked as he leapt into the air, landing with a thunderous impact that sent shockwaves through the enemy lines. The sight of the Hulk, towering over the battlefield with his massive form, was enough to make even the most fearless orc hesitate. The Hulk roared, his voice shaking the air around him, and charged forward, smashing through enemies with nothing but sheer brute force. His punches created craters in the earth, his fists sending orcs flying in all directions. There was no strategy to his assault, only an overwhelming desire to destroy anything that stood in his way. As Thor continued to rain down lightning, Hulk rampaged through the ranks of the orcs, their bodies no match for his strength. Together, the two heroes formed a tidal wave of destruction, a force the orcs had never encountered before. The free peoples watched in stunned silence as the battlefield transformed. What had seemed like a lost cause was suddenly filled with hope. The war was not over yet, but with the arrival of Thor and Hulk, Middle-earth had a fighting chance. Their presence on the battlefield was not only a sign of their immense power, but also a symbol that even in the darkest times, unexpected allies could change the course of history. Clash of Titans, Thor and Hulk versus Azog the Defiler. The battle of the five armies had shifted, but the victory was far from certain. With Thor's lightning tearing through the battlefield and the Hulk smashing through the enemy ranks, hope had returned to the free peoples. But the true test had yet to come. In the midst of the chaos, the towering figure of Azog the Defiler, the fearsome orc chieftain, emerged from the heart of the battlefield, his white skin glistening with the blood of his fallen enemies. He was a force to be reckoned with, his eyes burning with hatred as he set his sights on Thor and the Hulk. Azog's war axe, a cruel and jagged weapon, gleamed in the sunlight. The orcs around him parted like the seas, their leaders stepping forward to face the true threat. The battlefield fell silent for a brief moment as the monstrous orc locked eyes with Thor, the god of thunder. A tension hung in the air, thick and oppressive. Azog had slaughtered many in his pursuit of dominance, but he had never faced a foe like this. Thor's presence alone was enough to shake even the fiercest warriors, but Azog was determined to prove that no god would stand in his way. Thor raised Mjolnir high, the hammer crackling with lightning, his grip firm and unwavering. He strode toward Azog, his steps firm and resolute, ready to face the monstrous orc in one final showdown. But Azog was no stranger to power. With a primal roar, He charged at Thor, his axe raised high. The two titans collided with a deafening crash, their weapons meeting in a clash that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Sparks flew as Mjolnir met Azeg's axe, the force of their collision shaking the earth beneath them. Azeg was powerful, stronger than most orcs, but he was no match for Thor's divine strength. Every blow from Mjolnir sent Azeg stumbling back, his monstrous frame struggling to keep up with the god's fury. But Azeg's rage was just as potent. He swung his axe in a brutal arc, striking Thor across the chest with a glancing blow. The wound, though minor, only seemed to fuel Thor's determination. As the battle between Thor and Azeg raged on, Hulk's rampage continued in the background. The Hulk's green form was a blur of fury, smashing through orcs like they were nothing more than toys. He was unstoppable, his rage a force of nature, but when he saw Thor locked in battle with Azeg, his instincts kicked in. With a guttural roar, the Hulk charged toward Azeg, his massive fists swinging in a wild arc. Azeg, momentarily distracted by the Hulk's approach, turned just in time to block a crushing blow. The Hulk's fist collided with the orc's war axe, shattering the weapon in an instant. Azeg, stunned, staggered backward. Thor seized the opportunity, his lightning-infused hammer slamming into Azeg's side, sending him crashing to the ground. The orc chieftain growled in fury, but he was weakening. Thor and Hulk's combined might had taken its toll. With one final, brutal punch from Hulk, Azeg's skull shattered like a fragile rock, and the once feared leader of the orcs crumpled to the ground, defeated. The battlefield erupted into cheers as the Free Peoples watched the fall of their greatest enemy. Thor and Hulk stood over Azeg's lifeless body, victorious. But the war was far from over. With the death of Azeg, new threats would rise, and the forces of darkness were far from finished. Yet, in that moment, the Free Peoples knew they had two of the greatest heroes fighting by their side. The turning point, heroes united. The tides of the Battle of the Five Armies had turned, but victory still felt uncertain. Thor and Hulk's arrival had injected new hope into the Free Peoples, but the battlefield remained chaos personified. Orcs and goblins surged forward, their numbers seeming endless. Yet, with each thunderous strike from Mjolnir and each rampaging blow from Hulk, the forces of darkness faltered. The death of Azeg, though a significant victory, had done little to slow the advance of Sauron's minions. But amidst the growing darkness, something profound began to shift. Thor and Hulk, once unlikely allies, had become the symbol of resistance. With every wave of enemies they crushed, their bond grew stronger. Thor's godly power and Hulk's primal rage seemed unstoppable together. But it wasn't just their might that was changing the battle. It was the hope they inspired in the hearts of Middle-earth's warriors. The dwarves, elves, and men, though weary, found new strength in the sight of these mighty beings fighting side by side. It was clear now. Thor and Hulk weren't just helping, they were leading. Thor, with his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, charged through the battlefield, his every swing lighting up the sky. The dark clouds above parted, and bolts of lightning struck down upon the orcs, disintegrating their ranks. The Free Peoples rallied around him, their morale boosted by the unyielding force of a god fighting alongside them. But as Thor led the charge, Hulk's relentless fury surged forward, smashing through orc lines with each colossal punch, his voice a guttural roar that sent fear into the hearts of the enemies. Hulk and Thor's coordinated attacks began to shift the momentum of the battle. Thor's lightning strikes created openings, and Hulk, with his sheer power, exploited them, tearing apart enemy ranks. Together, they were a force unlike any the Free Peoples had seen. But the true turning point came when they met the leader of the goblins, a giant beast that had emerged from the shadows of the battlefield, roaring in defiance. Thor's eyes blazed with fury as he stood at the forefront of the attack. "For Middle-earth," he shouted, his voice booming above the chaos. Hulk, his anger reaching a boiling point, let out a monstrous roar and charged straight at the goblin leader, the ground trembling beneath him. As the beast lunged toward them, Thor called down a bolt of lightning that struck the goblin's monstrous form, momentarily stunning it. The goblin screeched in agony, but before it could recover, Hulk closed the gap, grabbing the creature's massive arm and snapping it with a sickening crack. The battle between Hulk and the Goblin leader was raw, brutal, and primal. Hulk's fists pounded down with the force of 1,000 storms, each blow weakening the beast further. Meanwhile, Thor stood guard, deflecting any enemies that tried to disrupt Hulk's fight. With a final swing of Mjolnir, Thor obliterated the remaining forces around them, clearing the way for Hulk to finish his battle. Hulk, in a final burst of power, grabbed the Goblin leader by the throat and slammed it into the ground, shaking the earth with a final thunderous roar. The battlefield fell silent for a moment as the giant goblin lay motionless, defeated. The Free Peoples erupted in cheer as the Goblin leader's death sent ripples through the enemy ranks. The forces of darkness, seeing their leadership crumbling, began to retreat. The moment was crucial. The tide had shifted, and the Free Peoples, now united under the banner of Thor and Hulk, pressed the advantage. As the Free Peoples rallied and the remaining forces of Sauron fled, Thor and Hulk exchanged a brief, knowing glance. They had done it. They had united the armies of Middle-earth under a banner of hope, and together, they had proven that even in the darkest of times, heroes could emerge to turn the tide of battle. But the war was far from over, and the next battle would decide the fate of Middle-earth. The final stand, the Battle of the Five Armies. The battlefield was a storm of fury and destruction. The battle for Middle-earth had reached its climax. The armies of the Free Peoples, emboldened by the arrival of Thor and Hulk, had fought valiantly, but Sauron's dark forces were relentless. The orcs, goblins, and dark beasts still outnumbered them, and now, with the death of Azog and the defeat of the Goblin leader, new, more formidable enemies had appeared. Sauron himself, a force of darkness and death, had risen in the distance, his shadow casting an eerie pall over the land. Thor and Hulk stood at the forefront of the army, their bodies battered and bloodied, but filled with an unwavering determination. Their combined strength had turned the tide before, but the final stand was upon them, and this would be the most dangerous battle they'd face. The Free Peoples had fought for so long, but they were at the edge of exhaustion. The enemy was still too strong, and now, the true test of their unity and resilience was about to begin. Thor raised Mjolnir high, the hammer crackling with the fury of the storm, while Hulk's massive form loomed beside him, his eyes burning with raw rage. Their presence was a beacon of strength, and the Free Peoples rallied around them. Thor shouted, his voice carrying above the noise of the battlefield. "Now we end this. For Middle-earth." With a deafening roar, Hulk charged forward, his massive fists smashing through orc lines. The ground shook beneath his feet as he tore through anything that stood in his way. His primal rage, once again unleashed, sent shockwaves through the enemy forces. Every blow from Hulk was like a natural disaster, toppling entire units of orcs and goblins. Thor, in perfect harmony with Hulk's rampage, summoned the power of the storm. With each swing of Mjolnir, lightning ripped through the sky, striking down orcs and dark creatures with unrelenting force. Thor moved with precision, guiding his strikes with divine power, sending enemies scattering before him. His hammer was a weapon of godly destruction, and with every swing, he cleared the way for the Free Peoples to advance. But just as the battle seemed to be turning in their favor, a new threat emerged, a colossal, black-armored beast. A dark knight imbued with Sauron's magic appeared at the heart of the battlefield. The beast's dark armor gleamed under the stormy skies, and its sword crackled with dark energy. It was a creature of pure malice, and it was unlike anything Thor and Hulk had ever faced. Its presence was suffocating, and it seemed to rally the orcs around it. Thor and Hulk, undeterred, stood side by side, ready for the ultimate confrontation. With a roar, the Dark Knight charged at them, swinging its sword with blinding speed. Thor met the blade with Mjolnir, the hammer crackling with the force of the storm. The clash sent ripples through the battlefield, but the Dark Knight was no match for Thor's divine strength. Hulk, enraged beyond measure, charged forward, tackling the Dark Knight with an earth-shattering punch that sent the beast sprawling. But the battle wasn't over. As the Dark Knight struggled to rise, Thor and Hulk unleashed their final combined assault. Thor summoned a cataclysmic bolt of lightning, striking the Dark Knight's sword and sending it to the ground. Hulk, seizing the opportunity, lifted the beast over his head and slammed it into the earth with a brutal crash. With the Dark Knight defeated, the remaining forces of Sauron faltered. The Free Peoples, inspired by the unwavering courage of their heroes, surged forward with renewed strength, sweeping through the enemy ranks. The Dark Forces were in retreat, their once unyielding grip on Middle-earth finally broken. The battle was over. The five armies had fought, bled, and sacrificed for this moment. Middle-earth had been saved, not by the might of one hero, but by the unity and strength of unlikely allies who had come together to fight for the future of the world. Thor and Hulk, though outsiders, had given the Free Peoples the chance they needed to triumph. As the dust settled and the last echoes of battle faded, Thor and Hulk stood victorious, knowing their time in Middle-earth had come to an end. They had fulfilled their mission, but their journey was far from over. For now, Middle-earth was free, and the heroes would return to their worlds. But the legacy of their victory would endure forever. The ultimate victory, a new beginning for Middle-earth. The echoes of battle still reverberated across the scorched earth as the last remnants of Sauron's forces fled into the shadows. The smoke of war billowed high into the sky, but amidst the devastation, there was something new, a sense of peace. The Free Peoples of Middle-earth stood victorious, their combined might and the unexpected intervention of Thor and Hulk having secured their survival. The darkness had been vanquished, and Middle-earth was free. Thor and Hulk stood at the center of the battlefield, their bodies bruised, bloodied, but unbowed. The once writhing battlefield now lay silent, save for the distant sounds of regrouping forces and the soft whispers of those who had witnessed the impossible. The storm that had raged above had dissipated, and the sky above was now calm, as if the world itself was taking a deep breath after the tumultuous storm. As the surviving warriors of the Free Peoples gathered, there was a palpable sense of awe. Thor, the mighty god of thunder, and Hulk, the unstoppable force of rage, had not only turned the tide of battle, but had given them something even more precious: hope. With their victory, the threat of Sauron's dark reign had ended, and Middle-earth had been saved from the brink of destruction. Yet even in this moment of triumph, there was no time for celebration. The cost of the battle had been high. Many lives had been lost, kingdoms devastated, and families torn apart. The Free Peoples would have to rebuild what was broken. But they had proven something far more important, that even the darkest forces in the world could be overcome when united. Thor, standing tall amidst the gathered warriors, turned his gaze toward the horizon, the sun now rising over the ruins of the battlefield. His voice, filled with both sorrow and pride, echoed through the still air. Middle-earth has endured much, but it has never been defeated. Its strength lies in its people, their courage, their resilience, and their unity. Together, we have overcome the darkness, but the work is not yet done. This is only the beginning. Hulk, standing beside Thor, gave a guttural grunt. His massive fists were still clenched, but the rage that had driven him through battle had subsided. He may not have spoken, but his presence spoke volumes. He had been a force of nature, an unstoppable wrecking ball that had torn through the battlefield. But now he was calm, his fury quieted. The battle was won, and he had fulfilled his role. His work here was done. As the survivors of the Free Peoples began to tend to the wounded and rebuild their cities, Thor and Hulk exchanged a glance, understanding passing between them. It was time for them to leave. Their purpose had been fulfilled, and Middle-earth no longer needed their might. They had come to save the world, and now they would return to their own. Thor raised Mjolnir high one last time, a sign of respect to the warriors around him. "The path ahead is yours," he said, his voice ringing with finality. "May you never forget the strength you have when you stand together." With that, Thor and Hulk turned and made their way toward the horizon, the world behind them still recovering, but filled with hope for the future. The Free Peoples watched them go, knowing that they had faced the ultimate test, and emerged victorious. As the sun rose higher in the sky, a new era began for Middle-earth. The shadows of war faded, and the light of a new beginning dawned. The legacy of the Battle of the Five Armies would be written in the hearts of those who had fought, and in the lives they would rebuild. For Middle-earth, the journey ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And as the heroes departed, one thing was certain: the world would never forget the day when the gods and monsters united to save it.